Welcome, my dear friends. It is wonderful seeing you. In case we haven't been introduced before, I am Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game reviews, and I get to interview interesting people. On this episode, we encounter a supernatural tale of horror, The Night of the Ettercap. Appearing in my short story collection, Memphis Dirty, Tales from the Dirty South. It didn't quite fit in with the vampire theme of Halloween season 2023, but it perfectly fits in with the darker months ahead. So let us leave behind the comforts of the day and enter the Night of the Ettercap. I don't care what this honorable court thinks or wants. None of you are ever going to believe me anyway. There is no way in God's green hell that any of you are going to buy this. I saw it, and it happened, but you're going to have me committed if I tell the jury what I saw out there. I'd rather be charged with contempt. Father Matthew Dunnigan was a little upset. If you had been through what he had and been told to tell the story exactly as it happened to a courtroom of people who hadn't, you'd know for a fact they'd call you a lunatic too. Better to leave them guessing. 1982, Church of the Immaculation, Collierville. Yeah, it's a steady job being a priest, but the perks aren't that great. You get to spend your time listening to old people tell you dirty secrets about how they used to lust after their neighbor's wife, husband, or horse when they could still get it up, or attend tons of potluck social clubs where kept housewives tried to do something with their days. Sure, there were some eye-appealing teenage girls that came to service, but they were always covered head to toe, and it was against church law to do anything to get them less dressed. Maybe there were better ways to get a good education in theology than to do it the hard way. But, remembered Father Matthew Dunnigan, at least I'm not in Ohio anymore. Thank the Almighty for that. Even growing up there and not knowing anything else, he knew Ohio had to be a form of punishment from God. But for what sin he didn't know. Let's face it, Buckeyes suck, and it is way too cold all the damn time. To get out of there, he could either join the army or join the priesthood. Having talked with a couple morons who came home on leave from the army, the priesthood seemed like a better idea. He was afraid his brains and all the book learning he had in it would get smashed out by a rifle butt. St. Jerome's Seminary in New York was a way out for all that. Far away from that hick town he grew up in, Matt was expected to live by a code of conduct as a student. But he found a way around that, some of the time. One thing he liked about the education he was getting in New York, as opposed to old provincial Ohio, was that it was way more his style. What he learned didn't agree with everything his dad told him. He was being educated, given access to new books, new ideas, old ideas, whole new hells he had never heard of, and he was getting to see more of the world. People in his old town lived and died in the same damn town their parents did. Here, he was learning in depth about the history of the church, Jesus' acts and deeds, but it was almost fashionable for his teacher priests to dismiss the dogma of their own religion. They might preach it as gospel, but with a slight smirk and a wink, just so their flock didn't take it too seriously. It was subversive. He liked it. He was wrong. But he didn't find out about that last part until much later. Namely, 2 years after he moved down to Collierville, Tennessee, an old hick suburb of Memphis. This was back in the day before Collierville got colonized by FedEx pilots and their families in pink brick McMansions, but when the town was covered in cow pastures and farms. You might ask why Father Dunnigan would want to ever go near a small hick town again, but he chose this over an assignment to Los Angeles. Call it familiarity breeds content. Or maybe he heard that Memphis was a flashpoint of black culture and couldn't get enough of B.B. King and Isaac Hayes. Whatever the reason was, he was sick of Pam and Harold Pickles, the old couple who would not quit inviting him over for dinner tonight after the service. Listen, he thought to himself, thanks for the compliments on the service, which I worked on for about 15 minutes yesterday, but please go home so I can get to the bottle of moonshine waiting in my house. Well, thank you, Mrs. Pickles. I'm sure your meatloaf is just as delightful as last time you treated me to it. But I have a very sick soul to go be with tonight. That's what he actually said. The white-haired old woman doddered for a moment, blinking quietly as she took his answer and ran it through the slow processor in her head. Okay, Father. Thanks for the service. Come on, dear, Mr. Harold said, thankfully rescuing everyone from the situation at hand. Goodbye, Father, said Mrs. Pickles, her southern drawl in full effect. It was as thick and slow as molasses dripping down the wall. Father Matthew watched them turn and slowly dodder to their old blue pickup truck. God is good, he always said. Father Dunnigan, are you there? Damn it, Pam Pickles again. It was 10 o'clock at night. What the hell did she want at this hour? Especially after I've had this much to drink. Mrs. Pickles, hello. What can I do for you? Asked Father Dunnigan. The old lady, having been duly invited, launched into a panic. Father, the old lady screeched, I need you to come over here right now. This house is possessed. Come quickly. We need you to save us. What the bloody hell? What's that, Mrs. Pickles? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you correctly. What was that again? Asked the heavily inebriated young priest. Mr. Pickles and I were watching the TV, and we saw this show about a ghost that haunts a house. All the stuff he did on the TV happens in this house. We need you right now. This is why technology is a bad thing. 1, it gives stupid people ideas. 2, it gives them the ability to get in touch with other people and share their stupid ideas. Mrs. Pickles, please, really, it is very late. It's just a work of fiction. The TV show is not real. Oh, yes, it was. It had that law enforcement officer from the other shows on there. And it's true with all that's going on. Mrs. Pickles, did you see the ghost in Mr. Chicken with Don Knotts? Oh, yes, Officer Fife was in the show about the ghost possessing the house. No, Mrs. Pickles, that was a movie. It didn't really happen. It's not real. Now, please, go to bed. It's real, Father! I saw it myself! Mrs. Pickles, please put Mr. Pickles on the line. I have special instructions for him on how to take care of the ghost in your house. Oh, okay, she helpfully agreed. With a loud clack, she put the bulky earpiece down on the table so she could shuffle away to fetch her husband. Wow, why can an Irishman not have a good drunken peace? Matt wondered to himself. Hello, Father, came the wavering old voice of Mr. Pickles. The reasonable one. Mr. Pickles, please, your house is not possessed by a ghost. It's just a show, a fictional show you saw. It was make-believe. Really? So then we don't have a ghost in the house? We have heard a lot of strange noises around the house, especially at night, said Mr. Pickles. I'm sure it's not possessed or haunted, but I do want you to do something to make sure, okay? Offered the priest. Oh, okay, said Mr. Pickles. I need the two of you to sit around the kitchen table, hold hands, and pray that God keeps your house pure and insoluble, sacrosanct. Yes, that should do for tonight, and the sun coming up will take care of the rest, okay? Oh, okay. That sounds real good. Thank you, Father. Thank you, good night. God bless you, Father. Yeah, thanks, bye. Matt hung up swiftly. The small television set on Father Dunnigan's countertop flickered, the antenna doing its best to pick up Channel 5, News at 11. Now that the Pickles could go screw themselves for the rest of the night, his vision focused a bit when the reporter started talking about a young boy who had gone missing in Memphis. Something about his simpleton mother being brought in by the police for questioning in connection with the young boy's disappearance. Sick freak, murmured Matt, as he blearily heard the story unfold. He had seen it happen before up north. Mom goes nuts, strangles, drowns, stabs her own flesh and blood until it stops moving, then freaks out and hides the body. Why the fuck did that freak bother having that tender little boy in the first place? She could have given it up for adoption, or just left it at Grandma's house and disappeared into the night. It was Memphis. People do things like that here. There's songs about it. Father Matthew Dunnigan woke up the next day, his head suddenly splitting with pain as the glass on his front door was being slapped viciously. He rolled over on the linoleum floor of his kitchen and slowly got off the ground, accompanied by the incessant slapping. He unlocked the deadbolt and then stopped before unlocking the rest. He ducked over to check himself out and his reflection on the pane of the microwave oven. Okay, not too bad, he thought. Opening the door, the harsh fall morning sun blasted him in the eyes. "Father done again," came the crackly old female voice. Mr. and Mrs. Pickles, at 8:23 in the morning, on his doorstep. The excessive noise hit his ears like a brick. "Mrs. Pickles, hello, good morning. What are you doing here?" asked Father Dunnigan. "Father, the cows were attacked, Father. I told you it was an evil ghost in the house. They're eating the cows," the old lady crowed. Matthew had to slow her down. Wait. Mr. Pickles, what's going on?" "Calm down, dearie. Let me talk to the man," cautioned Mr. Pickles as he patted his wife's shoulder. "Father Dunnigan, we came over because 2 of the cows have gone missing. The rest of the herd is spooked, and so are we." This is what his parishioners bothered him for at 8:23 in the morning. "Well, did you tell the police? Animal control? They could tell you if there are any wolves in the area." Mr. Pickles held his wife back from raising another ruckus, and the old man adjusted his heavy spectacles before he answered. "This was no coyote attack. There's no sign of a struggle. The coyotes would have left the bodies near the edge of the woods. Now, we have coyotes down here, not wolves." "Whatever it is you have down here, it sounds like something the cops should investigate for you. Maybe call your insurance adjuster," offered Father Dunnigan, hoping they would listen and leave him the heck alone. That was the last straw for Mrs. Pam Pickles. After 10 minutes of verbal bludgeoning and laceration from the startled old woman, Father Dunnigan, in his weakened state, begged for mercy and agreed to come to the house later. With that concession won, the old parishioners tottered off, leaving Father Matthew to recover from the day of the Lord. The herd of cattle moaned and mooed as it pressed up against the fence closest to the house. Out of the acres of pasture open for them to graze on, every last one of them was pushing themselves up against the fence. That is kind of weird, Father Matthew thought. As he stood on the back of the porch in the early twilight, Mr. Pickles came up to him, doing a lot of yammering on about the cows and the lay of the pasture with the woods at the back of the lot. Basically, the priest realized he was going to be held hostage with kindness by these old, reliable parishioners until he exorcised the house. It was ridiculous, a rite of exorcism. All it did was feed into people's superstitions and distract them from real problems in their lives. Does your house make strange noises in the dark of night? Your house is settling. Does your kid act like a brat nonstop and cause up a storm in church? Well, there's something wrong with the kid's head, and you're probably responsible for it. Blaming demons for all of life's problems is a crappy way of dealing with your issues. Heck, Father Matthew didn't even know the rite of exorcism, so he just made up some stuff that looked convincing. As a parish priest, he didn't even have the authority to perform the rite of exorcism in the Catholic Church. His bishop would have to appoint someone to do it or do it himself. Matthew was not about to look stupid by asking his superior to come exorcise a cow pasture. After waving his hands and reading some verses from his Bible at the house, the Pickles insisted he do the whole farm, but he was able to extricate himself from that situation. That bit of sleight of hand was enough to allay the worst of his parishioners' hysterics, and that was good enough for him. "Father Dunnigan!" came the old shrill voice of Pam Pickles on the other end of the phone. "It might be time to get a different phone number." "What? Yes, Mrs. Pickles. How are you?" replied Father Matthew. He was sober because he had the feeling this was going to happen. He didn't know yet what this was, but he knew it was coming. "Father Dunnigan!" she hollered into the wrong end of the receiver. There was a weird, strangled, beastly noise in the background. That was creepy. "It's happening again. This time the ghost is killing the cows. Come quickly." What did she just say? Wait, what, Mrs. Pickles? The cows are being attacked? Call the police. I'll come over. When he got to the Pickles farm, he saw what she had been so frantic about. Wow, she had really understated how awful the sight was. Mr. Pickles led Father Dunnigan through the house, past a hysterical shotgun-toting Mrs. Pickles, to the back porch they had just been on earlier today. He didn't know if he should throw up or scream and run from what he saw lying there. The crying herd in the background was just as startled and confused as their owners at the sight and stench of their mutilated brother on the porch. Illuminated by the spotlight on the back of the house, there lay what must have been a cow, charitably described now as a carcass, emaciated, lacerated, oozing green pus, and discolored all over its brown hide with patches of sickly blue, rotten black, and jaundiced yellow. The thing was practically falling apart, with congealed blood and pus all over. When it twitched, Father Dunnigan tripped and fell off the side of the rail-free wooden porch. Even though his neck was what broke his fall, Father Matthew sprang back to his feet, eyes wide with terror. "What the hell is that?" he shouted. "That's what the missus called you about, Father," answered Mr. Pickles. "We were sitting there watching the TV when we heard a loud crash on the back porch. We came out here and old Barney was waiting on us. He went missing a month ago. I wish he had stayed gone if he meant to come back like this." "Ah!" cried Father Dunnigan. This was the most horrible thing he had ever seen. It would soon be challenged by several others. "This is why we asked you to bless all the property," Mr. Pickles said. Father Matthew knew he had to do something. "Give me a flashlight, and let's look around the property. We have to find what did this." "Okay, let me get the shotgun from the missus," Mr. Pickles said. He shuffled into the house and came back out toting the shotgun, while Mrs. Pickles made some coherent shouting from inside. The two of them made their way into the pen and looked up and down the pasture in the darkened night. The cops never showed, even though Mrs. Pickles called several times. An hour passed, but there was no sign of coyotes. However, there was a patch of the wire fence at the edge of the woods that was torn all to hell. The two grown men stood there, staring at the gaping hole. It was really dark out, the light shed by the spotlight on the porch a distant beacon, bringing no comforting light this far out. The pathetic flashlights they held did not reassure them that it was a good idea to keep going into the night-shrouded woods. Being sensible men, they agreed to go back to the house and keep an eye on the herd from the edge of the pen. Sure, they could have sat on the rocking chairs on the porch, but they had no wish to go anywhere near that porch. The next day, the Pickles agreed to stay put and keep an eye on the herd. Much more importantly, they decided to do something with that desiccated carcass on the back porch. Father Matthew, still jumpy from the adrenaline that rushed into his system last night, drove to the police station to see why the heck they never showed up, despite several pledges to do just that. That was a wasted trip. Even with the parish priest personally pleading for anybody to come out and take a look at the thing they got left on the porch, the cops didn't care. "It was just a coyote," they said, not looking up from the newspaper. "Happens all the time." "There is no way that coyotes did this," protested the priest. Father Matthew gave a detailed description of the fetid corpse that something threw onto the 5-foot-tall porch. "Probably some kid's prank," the cop answered. "Are you serious? A group of kids tortured and mangled this cow, then without a truck or any equipment, threw the rotten cow's body onto an elevated platform?" "Listen," said the bored police officer at the desk. "We've got our hands full helping look for this little kid whose mom killed him. We've got a lot of searching to do, and a dead cow just ain't that important." "Well, 2 other cows have gone missing too. Can one of you just come out and look to see if there are any clues about what happened to them?" asked the priest. He might as well have gone for a walk in the park. These cops were damn useless. Since the town library was not that far of a walk, Father Matthew decided to go looking there. Research was something he was always good at in school, and maybe there was something in the library's newspaper archives about this. This was clearly not a coyote attack, and no punk kids did this. Flipping through the bound volumes of the Commercial Appeal and the Memphis Press Scimitar, he found a lot of old Elvis pictures and some stuff on E.H. Crump, but when it came to deranged atrocities involving cattle, the coverage was a little thin. He found a few small articles about coyote attacks in the periphery of Shelby County, and some kids' pranks involving police scolding teenagers caught tipping cows. There was one incident in Fisherville, just up the road from here. It looked like it would be promising. That turned out to be a bust, though, as most of the article consisted of quotes from the spooked hick farmers and one line about the grisly remains of the cow. No pictures, not a thing to go on. Driving his blue Cutlass Supreme back to the Pickles farm, Father Dunnigan decided the only way to get to the bottom of this was to go look in the woods for himself. The cops weren't going to do anything, so it fell to him to look after his flock. He did happen to pick up a crucifix and dip several vials of holy water just to comfort the Pickles, of course, for their sake. "What did you find out, Father?" asked the weary Mr. Pickles, as Father Dunnigan closed his heavy car door. The young priest walked up to the back porch, his eyes searching for the hideous bovine corpse on the wooden planks. Thank God they moved the body. He didn't ask what they did with it. "Not much," he answered, squinting in the late afternoon sun. "The police are tied up right now with searching for that unfortunate child from the news. They don't have any officers to provide. It's left to us to settle this." The wrinkled old man nodded, his drooping chin shaking as he did so. The missus is taking a rest inside. Would you care to do the same? I reckon we need to be rested up to keep an eye out tonight. Mr. Harold, you should go ahead and get some sleep. I'm going to go looking in the woods while we still have some sunlight. But I'll take you up on the offer when I get back. I will take some coffee if you have any ready. Mr. Pickles did have just that. After giving out a heady shot of caffeine-laced liquid, the old man bedded down. Father Dunnigan politely declined the offer to carry the shotgun with him, but did take a flashlight at Mr. Pickles' insistence. Those woods go deep, he said. Trekking past the uneasy herd, Father Dunnigan walked across the open green field. His eyes hurt from lack of sleep, and he ached all over. His neck was really sore, but he knew he couldn't sleep right now. If he lay still long enough, he knew he'd wake up too stiff to move, much less find out what the hell did that to the poor cow. He saw the ruined barbed fence at the edge of the pasture, and it looked even less appealing with the light of day on it. The wires had not been cleanly clipped, like with bolt cutters. The metal stake that tied the fence together was also broken off at the base, which was completely unnecessary. An intruder would have just had to cut the wires to get through. There was no need to break the stake. How did the stake get broken to begin with? He crossed himself and splashed a few drops of holy water on the breach. He wasn't sure what good it would do, but it felt good to do something. But what did this? Father Matthew stalked through the forest, trying to be quiet, even as his loafers crunched on the piles of fallen leaves that carpeted the woods. There were plenty of fresh leaves on the ground now, with the trees half denuded of their foliage in the face of encroaching winter. He hopped across small streams and dead logs, ducked one low-lying branch only to be poked in the eye by the sharp twig sticking out just behind it. Fortunately, it had been pretty dry out, as dry as it ever was in the Mississippi Valley. Twilight was creeping up, and Father Dunnigan was about to turn back when his eyes caught something. The bank of leaves on the opposite side of a tiny stream looked like something really large had been dragged through it. This far in the woods, there was no way a truck or even four-wheeler would have done that. It's possible that it was cow-shaped, but there was nothing nearby that could have made it. Just then, he heard a lowing come from deeper in the forest. It was getting dark, but the sound was not far away. That had clearly been a cow's voice. His loafers splashed in the shallow mud as he dashed across the stream. The noise did not sound again, but he followed the direction from whence it came. After getting stabbed by several more snapping branches, he arrived at its source. He would never forget what he saw in the pine grove. Lying on the moss-covered ground, he saw two cows on their left side, heads lying limp on the ground. Their breathing was labored and deliberate. One of their bellies scarred up, as if it had been split open and crudely fastened shut. He walked closer to them, his eyes fixed on the travesty in front of him. He saw caked blood on both of their foreheads, just above their eyes. Their dull cow eyes stared off, barely blinking, completely unfocused. They looked to be paralyzed, as they just lay there when the priest approached. The sun was practically gone, the woods dark, with only a hint of reddish light still there to highlight the silent shades of trees. Father Matthew clicked on his flashlight and shone it around the area. He found that he was standing in the midst of a profuse mushroom grove, the kind that rise up like a church steeple, brown with black spots protruding off the caps. Father Matthew had not seen this kind before, so he stared more closely at the cap of the largest one near him. As he stared at it, he noticed that one of the black spots oozed before his eyes. It wasn't coloration, it was blood. The mushrooms were sprinkled with drying blood. Father Matthew startled straight up when he heard a snap in the darkened woods. He searched around, the heavy breathing of the cattle covering up the smaller noises of the forest by night. As his flashlight searched fervently around the grove, it caught on a yellow t-shirt with one of those annoying stuffed puppets from the TV show on it. It was that little kid they kept showing on the TV news shows. He sat up against the base of a tree, a fine dusting of pine needles on him. Father Matthew rushed over to the little boy, kneeling down to help him. "Son, are you all right? Everybody's been looking for you. All over the county. What are you doing out here?" he asked as he flicked the pine needles off the child. He wanted to make sure no bugs were on the kid, and he was also looking for injuries or signs of blood. "Hey, let's get you out of here," he said. He stopped what he was doing when he saw the indentation in the boy's forehead. There was caked blood under the boy's nose, and his eyes stared, unfocused, straight ahead of him. "Oh my God," thought Father Matthew. "What happened to this child?" He was scratched up all over, and the web-like scabs covered the boy. What the hell's going on? Whatever it was, Father Matthew needed to get him out of here. He and Mr. Pickles could come back tomorrow for the cows, but this boy needed help now. Picking the boy up over one shoulder, Matthew stood upright, the blood rushing to his head, making him unsteady. The exhaustion was really starting to tell on him. As the priest turned to backtrack his path through the black woods, he jumped back, almost slipping to the ground as he yelped at what his flashlight illuminated. Just a few feet away in the grove stood what looked like a mud doll, barely 2 feet tall. It stared at the priest, who shone the flashlight right into its smooth, noseless face with burning, coal-red, hate-filled eyes. It tilted its head to the side, like an animal measuring up prey, and let out a guttural hiss, opening its tiny mouth filled with rows of rough, needle-like teeth. It had no ears, and it had stout, jagged claws instead of fingers. But what was most disturbing was its lone piece of clothing. On top of the thing's head was piled a coiled hat made of what looked to be dried intestines. Just then a pop sounded, and the flashlight went out. The sun was down, and the priest found himself in the company of what people from the old country would have called an Ettercap, whose grove he had invaded. But Americans don't have any legends about those creatures, and we don't cotton to superstitious claptrap like that here anyway. It would be the most memorable night of Father Matthew Dunnigan's life. In a terror-fueled night of sharp pain and desperate screaming, Matthew experienced what must be the torments of the damned. He ran as far as he could with the child, but lost him after tripping over a fallen branch. As he scrambled about for the child's still-breathing body, he grabbed onto the boy's leg, only to have it pulled from his grip by an incredibly awful strength. He dove in the dark after the boy's fleeing body, planting both hands in a death grip on the leg freshly wrested from him. While he heard an uncomfortable pop in his ankle still caught in the log behind him, he couldn't be moved, and he struggled with every muscle in his body to hold on to the boy. The boy's body went limp a couple times as the thing jerked on some unseen limb and finally slackened as the Ettercap let go. Matthew had no time to take a breath, pulling himself free of the fallen limb and limping to his feet as he snatched up the boy and began hobbling away. He tripped in the stream where he saw the sign of the cows being dragged through the leaves, falling face first into the mud. His vestments soaked with muck and leaf gut, he wiped his eyes as clean as he could, futile as that was in the dark. He rolled to one side to effect his rise and was launched onto his back, an irresistible force pulling him from behind. He slammed his head against a fallen limb and felt the boy's body be wrenched out of his grasp. Stunned by the impact, he lay there as he heard the boy being dragged at an incredible pace away from the sight, deeper into the forest. It took a moment for his body to answer him, his eyes having flashed with black spots even in the darkness. He pulled himself back up, his ankle now on fire with searing pain. He began hobbling away, but the Ettercap's ire had been aroused. Now he would play his games with the wounded human. Smoldering and screaming, Father Matthew Dunnigan ran his tattered body away from the flames that engulfed the woods behind him. His bloody eyelids seeped into his eyes, burning and blinding him, but he had somehow found enough kerosene and spite to set the woods on fire from deep inside. Oh, he had made it out of the woods and away from the claws of that little evil thing, but he wasn't going to let that be the end of it, even for one round. He made it into the Pickles' pasture, broke into the barn, and grabbed all the flammable fuel he could set his stinging, lacerated hands on. Then he stumbled as fast as his hate would carry him back to the woods. He'd burn that little bastard out and take that sick grove with it. As he stood at the edge of the forest, raging with fire as the sun dawned in the east, he didn't notice the flashing blue lights or Mr. Pickles trying to talk him down. He didn't notice the handcuffs being put on him, or the emergency technicians trying to close the hundreds of jagged, tiny cuts covering his body. He was charged with arson, and he stood trial for it, but they would never believe what the hell he saw that night. Now, wasn't that a nasty little bit of awful? Well, I did enjoy reading this again, and I was particularly amused by the priest's sense of snide arrogance and condescension towards the faith that physically sustained him. That Ettercap grove, that grossed me out reading it again just as much as it grossed me out to write it all those years ago. I wanted to do justice to those nasty little fae creatures, and boy, howdy, I feel like I did. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So if you don't mind, please drop those in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dark little tale, I do enjoy it when you like and subscribe, so you know how to make that happen. We can both win here. And I thank you for your time, that you chose to spend it with me and Memphis Dirty once more. Well, as we, dear friends, part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.